Hey, hope your day or night's going well. Let's talk about Unreal. Unreal is an FPS game released in 1998, developed by Digital Extremes and Epic Mega Games. It's easy to point at specific games from this time, like Quake and Half-Life, because of their influence on the games industry, but I don't feel like Unreal gets the credit and recognition that it deserves. So whether you're a 90s FPS veteran, or someone that may have never even heard of this game before, let's take a look back at one of 90s forgotten classics. I want to begin with the atmosphere of Unreal, because it's by far the defining aspect of this game. Unreal was nothing short of revolutionary when it came out. I mean, they literally named the engine after it. This game shocked the PC world when people first saw it. It was such a massive leap in graphical fidelity compared to anything else out at the time. The developers knew this too, because of the way the game's intro is handled. You start out on a crashed ship, with metal walls all around you. If you didn't know much about this game at this point, you might just be thinking that this is going to be another shooter that takes place mostly indoors where everything looks the same. But as you make your way forward, you eventually make your way outside, and then... Seeing this back in the day, your mind was instantly blown at just how good this game looked. The lighting, the detail, the water, the sheer scale of it all was simply stunning. Nothing out at the time even came close to this. Sure, it might not be the prettiest thing ever today, but I still think Unreal is a prime example of why art style matters so much. This game was so ahead of its time. It took years for something else to come out and match the visuals of Unreal. Crank it up to a modern resolution, and this game still looks great. And then there's the audio. Unreal has a great soundtrack that goes excellent with its visual style. It's got so many tracks that evoke this sense of exploration and nature as you make your way through this world, and it's able to switch on a dime when you start engaging the enemies. Both of these things combine to create a truly immersive and memorable atmosphere that will stick with you for a very long time. Let's talk about the gameplay next. The gameplay of Unreal, like its visuals, is timeless. The campaign is structured a bit like Quake 2, where you basically have zones or areas that you move through in order to progress. Unlike in Quake 2 though, you aren't able to go back to a previous zone once you move on to the next one. Unreal is actually a very long game compared to what came before it. It takes most first-timers around 10 hours to beat, depending on how much they die and how lost they get. For comparison, Quake 1 is only about 3 to 4 hours long, and Quake 2 is about 5 to 6. Although you absolutely will get lost at least a few times. I've beaten this game more times than I can count, and I still find myself getting turned around in some of these levels, specifically the indoor ones. The path forward just isn't super obvious sometimes, and you end up walking past it over and over until you eventually figure it out. I wouldn't call this a bad thing though. Part of what makes Unreal so special is that it represents one of the last games to feature the style of level design that was lost in the post-Half-Life era of shooters. You just don't see level design like this in games these days, and I think it's worth the trade-off of getting lost for a few minutes here and there. Then there's the combat. It's a 90s shooter, so of course there's a wide range of weapons to use. Some of them look pretty sweet too. Some of my personal favorites include the rocket launcher, which has this really nice rusted metallic look to it, and the sniper rifle, which is just super satisfying to use. There's also the dispersion pistol, which regenerates ammo over time and has upgrades for it that you can find to make it more useful. And trust me, you're going to need all these weapons in order to take on some of the enemies in this game. The AI is the other primary feature that really set Unreal apart when it came out. You might notice that a lot of the enemies I'm fighting sort of act like they're controlled by other people, and that's because they basically are. You see, the AI for Unreal enemies actually comes from someone that created bots for Quake Deathmatch. That's why they're able to strafe back and forth instead of just standing around like the AI in most other games from this time. Again, it might not look super impressive today, but this was amazing at the time. I will say the enemy variety is a bit on the low side, and there's one or two enemies that are pretty annoying to fight, but I would say it's a good enemy roster all in all. There's also a couple bosses that are quite good, at least the first time you fight them, because one of them is reused like 5 or 6 times. Then there's the movement, which is a little hit or miss. The movement itself actually feels really nice. It's smooth and responsive like you would expect. I think it could be a bit faster, but it's good. But then there's this ability that makes controlling your character really annoying sometimes. If you quickly press any movement key twice, your character will do this super janky dodge move where you lose all control of your movement until it's finished. This might just be me, but I set this off on accident constantly and end up getting killed because of it. You have to fight enemies near cliffs pretty often, so I'll accidentally activate this and just get sent over the edge. There is a way to deactivate this if you go into the advanced settings and change a value, but yeah, kind of a weird addition. Let's go over the story now. Before we start though, if you head into the options menu, you'll notice that you can change the character that you play as, including their gender. This doesn't matter for the base game, but we'll come back here when we get to the expansion. You control Prisoner 849, who is on board a spacecraft called Vortex Rikers, when suddenly the ship is pulled towards an uncharted planet called Napoli. The ship crashes with you being one of only a few survivors. Those survivors won't last long though, as the ship is immediately invaded by hostile enemies known as the Scar and are slaughtered. Your primary objective is clear: survive and get off the planet by any means necessary. Now, it's not the deepest story in the world, but Unreal's plot is the foundation that allows the other aspects of the game to work as well as they do. There's also a bit more that you uncover throughout the game through the use of text logs. From these, you'll learn about the native species on this planet that you will encounter, the Nali. This is a non-hostile race of creatures who share a common enemy with you. They're just trying to survive, but won't actively fight back against their enemies, so it's up to you to help them whenever you come across them. This is worth doing too. If you help them out and keep them alive, you'll often be rewarded with either an early weapon or some health and ammo items. You don't have to, of course, but it's a pretty cool addition that really helps add some variety to the gameplay and makes the world feel more alive. You'll eventually make your way to a small spacecraft that doesn't have any fuel in it, and that's where the credits roll for the base campaign. In May of 1999, an expansion for Unreal was released called Return to Napoli. This expansion takes place directly after the events of the base game, and is much more story-focused. Remember that character select I mentioned earlier? Well, this is where we're going to be using that. That's because our character is now fully voiced. I highly recommend choosing the female character for this expansion. The male voice works, but he sounds a lot more calm for some reason, which just doesn't fit right.
A day after my so-called rescue, and I'm going back to the surface of the planet. They've promised me a full pardon and transit back to Earth in exchange for my help.
A day after my so-called rescue, and I'm going back to the surface of the planet. They've promised me a full pardon and transit back to Earth in exchange for my help.
So the expansion begins with you being picked up by a spacecraft run by the military. As you would expect though, things don't go the way that our character would like them to. The military wants you to go back to the planet that you just escaped from and retrieve something for them. This is kinda dumb if you ask me. Like, I know they need a narrative of some kind for this expansion, but is this really the best they could come up with? I mean, this spacecraft is full of soldiers with advanced weaponry, and the best option in their eyes is sending this random prisoner they found floating in space to do their job. I don't know, to me this comes off as lazy writing, but at the end of the day, the story isn't what we're here for. So you agree to the mission, and the expansion begins. It starts out very similar to the base game. You're inside for a few minutes, and then you make your way outside. Right off the bat though, you're given a new weapon. The assault rifle. This is a low damage, high fire rate weapon. It's very fun to use, but it chews through ammo incredibly fast, so you won't be using it too much. There's two other weapons that you'll come across too, the rocket launcher and the grenade launcher. These are kind of weird additions because the base game already had weapons that behave very similar to these, but they're still fun to use. There's also a couple new enemies to face in this expansion, which are nice additions to the roster. The expansion is also much shorter than the base game, coming in at around 3 to 4 hours. Part of that is because of the way that this expansion is structured. The levels in general are much more linear compared to the base game, meaning you don't spend near as much time wandering around aimlessly, which is good and bad. It's good if you hate being lost and just want to get through each level as quickly as possible, but I feel like a lot of the charm from the base game's level design was lost because of this. Overall though, it's a good expansion that provides more value to Unreal, and I would recommend it to anyone that liked the base game. Now I wish I could tell you that the Unreal series was in a good place today, but unfortunately it's not. The primary reason for that is because of the way that this game, and the franchise as a whole, was handled by its publisher. While the Unreal name was kept alive through multiple new Unreal Tournament entries throughout the late 90s and 2000s, the single-player campaign aspect of Unreal had a very short lifespan, given arena shooters were dwindling in popularity around this time. But that is only half the story. In December of 2022, Epic Games delisted basically everything related to this franchise from digital storefronts like Steam and GOG. I don't even need to explain how dumb this decision was. If you're someone wanting to go back and experience some of the best shooters of the 90s, you literally cannot do that legally for Unreal anymore. The only way to acquire this game legally today is to track down a physical DVD copy on a website like eBay. Of course, though, there are other ways to acquire it. I will never understand why companies do stuff like this. You cannot tell me that these old games were costing them an arm and a leg to keep up on their servers. And let's just say that the cost of selling them actually was causing them to lose substantial money. It wasn't, but let's just say that it was. Why not at the very least preserve these games for the future through some kind of collection or remaster? Night Dive has said for years now that they would love to do an Unreal remaster, but Epic just never went to them for some reason. And even if they didn't want to pay for that for whatever reason, the absolute bare minimum that they should have done was release the source code publicly. This would allow modders to preserve all of these games for many years to come. But alas, that hasn't happened, and probably never will. I really hate how this franchise has been treated over the course of its life, given how important it is. It just feels like Epic has zero respect for the series that allowed them to be where they are today. Fortunately, there are fan communities and projects out there that are doing great work to keep this series going in the best way that they can. I hope Epic decides to reverse this decision at some point, because this series means a lot to people, myself included. And that's Unreal. I've been wanting to revisit this one for a while now, given that this year marks the 25th year since its original release. It's one of my favorite games from this era, and I think it holds up incredibly well all these years later. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.